I guess back for more part 2 of the chapter 6, the integumentary system. Well, skin is made up of the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis, and the integumentary system includes skin, hair, and nails. All right, so let's talk a little bit about hair. What makes it different? In this diagram, you can see that the hair follicle is actually an intrusion of the epidermis into the dermis, and in some cases, all the way down into the adipose tissue. And so I just want you to use your imagination here for a second. The cells that here in the stratum basale that undergo keratinization as they move out towards the stratum corneum are undergoing their terminal differentiation, right? The same process is occurring laterally here within the hair follicle, okay? So these cells, which reside adjacent to the dermis, are on a basement membrane, the stratum basale, and they are becoming keratinocytes until finally these keratinocytes are welded together to form this big, beautiful hair shaft, okay? And, your hair color comes from the pigments produced by the melanocytes in the hair follicle. You can see that every hair follicle has its own capillary and a nerve. And, of course, when you pull a hair follicle out, it feels painful, right? So you're going to pull a nerve out with you. If you looked at hair, and luckily if we saw that in our class, when I showed you the hairs on my face using that handheld microscope, you definitely saw these scales. But in some cases where I'd shaved, you might have actually been able to see the medulla and the cortex and the cuticle. And of course, you're welcome to take a look yourself in class. It's kind of interesting. Hair's fascinating. People spend a lot of time trying to fix their hair, and so if you have any special interest, come see me, and we'll take a look at your hair and learn more about it. Every hair follicle is associated with a sebaceous gland, and the sebaceous gland, remember, is a holocrine gland, and it makes sebum, and this sebum combines with that keratinized tissue, or the keratinocytes, or the keratin in the keratinocytes, and keratohyalin to make this nice, beautifully annealed tissue. Sebum makes the stratum corneum waterproof and annealed, and it also makes your hair a nice and cohesive structure. Not much difference here than nails. Again, epithelium that arises to create keratinocytes, and your nail is almost pure keratin. Quite beautiful. It's lucid, just like that stratum lucidum, so it's kind of clear. The tissue just underneath it is called the hyponychium, and that's where your nails come from. If you've ever ripped a nail off, you know just how painful that can be. This is the eponychium, that's the cuticle, and that's really important in preventing bacteria and other invaders from getting into your body. This half-moon structure is called the lunula, and if you ever went to a physician from the East, he'd look at a couple things that your average doctor from the U.S. wouldn't. He'd look at your tongue, and he might look at the sclera of your eyes, and he'd look at your fingernails and look at those lunulas, and you're able to make some interesting diagnosis as to global health by looking at people's nail and skin, of course, easily, right? Next are the sebaceous glands. We've talked about them a little bit. You guys, as teenagers, may be very familiar with sebaceous glands. These are the glands that make your face so oily. They're secreting sebum, which is a combination of lipids and waxes, triacylglycerides, some free fatty acids, some waxes, some other stuff that just hominids make, and this stuff can get weird. Bacteria, it's all fat, so guess what? It's delicious if you're a bacterium, and so I can get infections in my sebaceous glands, which lead to acne vulgaris, and other bacteria that break down sebum can actually make some smelly stuff. I don't have sebaceous glands on my palms or soles. Remember, each sebaceous gland is associated with a hair follicle. Another ancillary organ of the skin is called the sweat glands. Again, they arise in the dermis. The most common sweat gland is called the eccrine sweat gland. It's a merocrine gland, just secretes sweat, water, and salts. And then I've got the apocrine gland. This is the weirdo. I remember apocrine glands were the glands that were able to have their own secretions but cell parts, okay? And so the apocrine sweat gland is actually connected to the sebaceous gland, and it dumps its contents into the sebaceous gland, and they mix together to make this weird waxy exudate that we find in our armpits and around our genitals and in the perineal region and oddly in the wings of your nostrils. And it can have a smell, and it can also carry pheromones. Pheromones are these odorific, aromatic carbons or compounds. They're made of fats, and they carry smells, and they are really important in sexual signaling. You know, dogs can tell when you're afraid. Well, that's because of the apocrine gland secretions. And in our primate ancestors, they all know when somebody's in heat, and quietly, you're communicating with your friends with your own pheromones. The apocrine glands, not the apocrine sweat glands, but the apocrine glands in other regions can give rise to the ceruminous glands. They're in your ears and they make wax. The mammary glands, which are in the breast tissue, they make milk. And then last but not least are the ciliary glands. So you have these little apocrine sweat or apocrine glands that make ciliary fluid in your eye. And of course, if you get an infection there, you get a stye, which is really painful. Next. Skin's really important in regulating body temperature. We did a whole thing on the results of heavy burns, and one of the big things is you can't regulate body temperature. So the skin has a layer of adipose. It insulates your body. Your skin has all kinds of blood vessels in it. So if I vasoconstrict, that is, if I tighten up my blood vessels, I can retain heat. And that's one of the reactions to cool temperatures. I can shunt blood to the core of my body. Of course, if it's hot, I can open up those blood vessels just like elephants do and lose heat to the universe. The control mechanism for thermoregulation is in the hypothalamus. And, your body's meant to be kept around 98.7 degrees, which is about 37 degrees Celsius. And some conditions can cause low or high body temperature. That is, if you have hypothyroidism, often these people have relatively low body temperature, which leads to a couple different things. Our skin color is the result of a lot of different factors. We all have different skin tones that are inherited from our parents, and in large part this is due to varying amounts of the pigment called melanin. Now, everybody has the same number of melanocytes, whether you have a very fair skin or dark skin, and what's different is the rate at which melanin is being produced and the size of the melanin granules. Melanin, as I said before, is a protein pigment. It does not have a metal ion in it, and so it doesn't reflect much at all. In fact, it's very absorptive. It absorbs all kinds of visual light, which makes it look dark black brown, but it also absorbs really shortwave light called UV radiation, and it protects your underlying tissues from the damage of UV light. If you are an albino, you can have a genetic disorder that would disallow you from making melanin, and of course you have very light skin. Of course, environmental factors that would change your skin color include how much sunlight you get, but also if I have just a high or very lax blood supply, it would make my skin rosy. Of course, if I have cardiac disease, it may cause cyanosis. That is, it would cause my skin to appear blue. Vitamin A, and if vitamin A is also called beta carotene, and it can give your skin an orange appearance. And then last but not least, in certain disease states, you might acquire jaundice. And so jaundice is the result of a pigment called bilirubin. It's a yellow color, and it's the product of the breakdown of erythrocytes, or red blood cells. So remember, hemoglobin's in your red blood cells. When you break it down, it gives rise to this yellow pigment called bilirubin. Wounds heal in a very complex manner. In short, I'd like you to know that, remember that the mast cells are these static cells that you find in the connective tissue, and there are a few macrophages we find in the epidermis, but the dermis is where we find these mast cells that produce heparin and histamine, and they initiate the inflammatory response. They initiate the coagulation of blood, and as that inflammatory response occurs, we have all kinds of endocrine mechanisms to start the proliferation of cells and the renewal of tissues with scar tissue, or replacement with scar tissue. One of the injuries that's really important and to understanding how skin's functions as our burns, and we've all had burns. We know how painful it can be, and they are categorized in terms of degrees, and so we have first, second, third, and even fourth degree burns. So first degree burn, you see arrhythmia. Erythrocytes are red. Arrhythmia means your skin gets red. It's painful. It's inflamed, and it's damaged. A second degree burn always means it's gone probably almost down into the dermis, and you'll have blistering. That's sort of like where you draw the line at second degree burns. You find blistering. In a third degree burn, we've gone through the epidermis, down into the dermis, sometimes through the adipose. And you can, if you remember when we read our case study, we can even have in the stage 4 burns down into the bone and muscle. And third degree burns have grave consequences. When you hear about people that have had burns, they always talk about some percentages that are associated. You have 20% of burns in your body, and this numbers is given to us by the Wallace rules of nines. So, generally speaking, the portions of your body can all be described by percentiles of all or factors of 9. So the front of your body represents 18%, and the back is 18%. The front of your head is 4.5%, and the back is 4.5%. Anyway, you get the idea. My purpose here is just to show you what they're talking about when they talk about percentage of body covered with burns or skin afflictions. Terrible things happen to your skin over time. It becomes saggy. It gets thinner. It wrinkles up. It gets dry. Your hair falls out, your nails get nasty. Don't get old, it's terrible. And most importantly, you also stop making all these really necessary vitamins like vitamin D. Of course, if you're young, you can have bad skin problems too. And of course, in high school, we're all worried about acne vulgaris. And acne vulgaris is the result of an infection of the sebaceous gland with the bacterium Acne vulgaris. And classically what will happen is that during adolescence, you have all kinds of hormones raging, and they cause changes in the proliferation of skin cells and in the production of sebum. And eventually what happens is these hair follicles in the sebaceous gland get blocked with dead skin, and that will allow Acne vulgaris to take purchase in there and cause an infection, which causes inflammation, pain, swelling, pus accumulation. Horrible stuff. So how do you treat acne? Well, generally speaking, the topical medicines you use will include a couple different features, right? One is an acid, right? And the acid's there to break down dead skin cells. 2 is an antibiotic to kill that Acne vulgaris. And 3 is an anti-inflammatory to try to bring down some of that inflammation. There's all kinds of like heavy-duty acne treatments, but that's not within the scope of our little presentation here. And I think that's it. Well, Bub loves you.